International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, an amazing organization working since 2005, but the tradition of Jewish anti-Zionism is as long as Zionism has been with us. There were many amazing figures, which some of them Sara is going to speak about. A number of them survivors of Holocaust. I will tell you just shortly, Sara, we met actually last year when she was visiting her with her family, and she just looked if there was a pro-Palestinian protest, and we were just protesting in front of the residency of the Israeli ambassador, and she came with us, and that's how we met. And since then we're in contact, and we wish to support AJ, the network. How do you say? IGEN. So there's a small group in Czech, a Jewish Voice for Solidarity, but it would be great if we also had Step Forward, which is like totally anti-Zionist organization. I know from states that Jewish Voice for Peace, actually it took them 5 years inner discussion to reject Zionism. It was hard for many members, so I can imagine you can speak on this note as well. Yeah. Because it's very difficult for, it's a family topic. And often people are not rejecting just Zionism, but they have to wrestle with this within the family, and it splits even families. So it's a very hard topic. So thank you so much, Sara. We can start.
Okay. Hi, good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm actually here from the United States because we have a chapter. We're an international network, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we have a chapter in the United Kingdom in London that is one of our oldest chapters. Our first chapter was in the San Francisco Bay Area and in different cities in the United States, but we have a really active chapter in London. And then Kira's here, who is going to be building a new work in Berlin. And we also have people building in Spain, and hopefully tomorrow we're talking to a couple people who want to bring the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network to Prague.
Yes.
So, like Yana said, we start with anti-Zionism. And for us, we think about anti-Zionism like we think about anti-racist struggle. And all of us in the network are a part of other anti-racist struggles of which Zionism attacks, and our anti-Zionism is a part of those broader anti-racist struggles. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about our understanding of the history of Zionism, and then the meaning of anti-Zionism and what the political goals and activities are of dismantling Zionism. And for us, anti-Zionism is a very important part of collective liberation. So I will talk more about that. But for a start, this is a poster that was created by Juan Fuentes, a political artist, in 1977, and it was to commemorate the second anniversary of a declaration that was passed initially in the United Nations that stated Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. And of course, like always happens and has happened, Israel lobbied and did a lot of work to have this resolution overturned. But it doesn't change the fact that the great majority of the world, and particularly the global South, has always understood Zionism as a form of racism. And I think in this current moment, we're really seeing a lot of leadership, of course, from South Africa, but much more leadership from the global south than we do from the global north in terms of any government resistance to the genocide in Palestine right now. So next slide, please. So we started to build in 2005. I came to this work through anti-apartheid work and the struggle to get ethnic studies started in the United States, third world studies, to keep building it and getting money for it in universities. And while I was doing that work, some of the people I was organizing with said, why don't you do work on Palestine? And at that time, because I grew up in a family that wasn't particularly Zionist, I never really thought about Israel. We had no relationship to it, and I just said at that time, it has nothing to do with me. Like, I don't understand why we're even there. I don't understand how I relate to that as a Jewish person living in the United States. But then after the Second Intifada and organizing around the war in Iraq, people said to me, if you don't do something about Zionism, then you're letting them speak for you. Your silence lets them speak for you. And so I started getting involved with a small group of other people who were part of Jews for a Free Palestine. And we were a local group. We did a lot of direct action. We targeted Zionist organizations and institutions in particular. And then we organized a delegation to Palestine. And so the first time I went to Palestine was as an anti-Zionist. And when I got to Palestine and understood the number of countries that were involved, very actively involved, in the ongoing colonization, occupation, and ethnic cleansing of Palestine, it just became really clear that a local direct action group was important, but we really needed something at an international level to oppose the way that Zionism operates internationally. And so we spent 2 years talking to Palestinians inside and across historic Palestine, in Lebanon, across Europe, Canada, the United States. They were connected to people in particularly Argentina. And we also spoke to leftists in Lebanon, leftists in South Africa. We worked very closely with people who are involved in the Black Liberation Movement in the United States and Pan-Africanism internationally. And there was general consensus that it would be useful to have a Jewish anti-Zionist network. But in conversations with the Palestinians, particularly on the ground in Palestine, they weren't interested in our solidarity. They didn't need Jewish people for their own liberation struggle. What they wanted from us was to be in collective joint struggle against Zionism, and for us to fight Zionism based on our own histories alongside with them. But of course, at the center of that is international solidarity. But the attack on Zionism is being led first and foremost by them, and our role is to also do that from our own histories. And we're a diverse network. We have Jewish people who have grown up with very different relationships to Judaism, from secular and humanist and more cultural relationships to relationships through political organizing and political histories to Orthodox and Reform Jews. We also have people in different parts of the world who come from Ashkenazi traditions, Eastern European traditions, or Sephardic traditions, which were Spain and then North Africa. And then we have Jews who represent different backgrounds, races, and ethnicities. So we also are very intergenerational. We have people, students that we work with who are at the university, And our oldest member is 94 years old, Selma James, who some of you may know for her work on race, class, and gender, but who also was married to and fought with CLR James in the West Indies, and they were both part of communist traditions in the United States. So, in our work, we have always stood for the full decolonization of Palestine. And of course, we stand with Palestinians in their demands for the full right of return. We respect their right to resist on their terms. It's not for us to set those terms. And connected to that is that we are looking for a departure from the legacies that Zionism is built on, and that we see Zionism as a continuation of. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Moshe Machover, how many people have heard of Matzpen? Has anyone heard of Matzpen? So Matzpen is an anti-Zionist Jewish organization founded by Moshe Machover in 1962. He was in 48, and it lasted 18 years inside of 48, and it was explicitly anti-Zionist, and it worked internal to 48 to fight the state and to demand a dismantling of a Jewish supremacist state. They worked...
Let me just stop you. 48, if there are some newcomers, that's a historic Palestine. I don't have to say what that is today, right?
Okay, yeah, good, stop me. So 48 is what people now call Israel plus the West Bank and Gaza, but by 48 we just mean all of historic Palestine. So for us, Zionism is a form of colonialism and an extension of European and now US imperialism. It is not a Jewish ideology, and of course it's not Judaism. It's a colonial, white nationalist. It came really out of European Jewish organizing. It of course displaced, as we'll talk about, many Jews from the region itself. But it's ongoing, as we are very clearly seeing now. That colonial process is ongoing. So I think most people here have a definition of Zionism, but even when we were in Germany, people came up afterwards and said, I just need an easy definition of Zionism. So we put this up. The basic principle of Zionism, as spoken here by Lapid, is, my principle says, maximum Jews on maximum land with maximum security and minimum Palestinians. But this was said by the founding leadership and military of Israel. Maximum Jews in Palestine with minimum Palestinians. And that has been the organizing principle of the State of Israel since its establishment. So what the Zionists did, and I will be very quick about the history. How many people here are generally familiar with the history of Zionism? Okay, so most of you are. So I'll do this quickly. So Zionism was a movement that was seeking a Jewish state as a solution to anti-Semitism, modeling itself on ethno-nationalist movements, colonial movements, and wanting access to state power. And they considered many locations. The founding Zionist leadership was not religious, they were secular. And what they were interested in was state power. They used the historical historical concept of a promised land in Palestine based on the Bible, but they were not religious. It was not a religious movement to return to Israel. There were many different strands, and Zionism was more a cultural concept and a reaching and a longing and a messianic religious idea, not an actual literal desire to move to Palestine. Most Jewish people at the time, at the turn of the 1800s, 1900s, didn't want to have anything to do with Zionism. They wanted to be able to live where they were with the rights that other people were given. So they considered multiple locations. But it's not, and this year has really changed things. It has really made it clear either you're with Zionism or you're not with it. And so Israel and Zionist organizations, for really one of the first times, are being very explicit again about being Zionist and about that being the fight. And so Zionism is the self-definition of the state of Israel and of Zionist organizations. And so anti-Zionism is the rejection of that ideology, right? Zionism is not a people, Jews are a people. Anti-Zionism is a rejection of an ideology and a state project. And that has always been true. So can you go to the next? So how do we understand the roots of Zionism? I've already talked about European colonialism. You know, if you read Herzl's book, Alt Nutland, or if you read any of the founding documents of Zionists, you can see the white supremacist racism of any of the colonial figures of that time and before and since. The ethnic and cultural nationalism. But the other thing about Zionism is that rather than reject anti-Semitism, it embraced it. It embraced the idea that Jewish people would be safest in isolation from the rest of humanity. And Israel has completely lived that out. And I'm going to talk a lot about the way that Zionism separates Jewish people from the rest of humanity. And our struggle for anti-Zionism is to rejoin with the rest of humanity. And in particular, to rejoin the history of the Jewish participation in struggles for our own, but also for collective liberation. And Zionism is in the way of that. Zionism, as we'll say in a little bit, also embraces very anti-Semitic notions of Jewish people living outside of Israel, of the people who both died and survived the Nazi genocide. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's also built on things like the history of US colonialism and the kind of apartheid laws and nature of the Jim Crow South or South African apartheid. Okay, the next. So, Jabotinsky. How many people in here are familiar with Jabotinsky? Okay. So Jabotinsky is one of the founding fathers of Zionism. And this is the first Zionist conference. Of course, there's Herzl, Jabotinsky is there. And at that time, there were different strands of Zionism. By the time the State of Israel was established, it became one project, which was political Zionism and maintaining a Jewish state in historic Palestine. And so here's a quote by Jabotinsky, who really has determined a lot of the policies and practices of the State of Israel. Jabotinsky came out of Poland, and he spent time as a young person fighting fascists on the streets in Poland. He then got trained by Mussolini. Yeah, Jabotinsky was trained by Mussolini.
And he was sending even like groups of Zionists there.
Yeah, he was sending people to be trained. And there was, we'll talk a little bit later about the Zionist history of collaboration with the Nazis. But for now, Jabotinsky wrote something called the Iron Wall. And what he meant by an iron wall was an impenetrable military might against the people of Palestine. And so he wrote a map of what it was going to take to first establish and then maintain a Jewish exclusive state in Palestine. And what he said was Zionist colonization, even the most limited form of it, must be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. And what he went on to say is, if you study history, and what did he use as his gold standard for colonization? The United States. And so what he said is, if you follow history, you either eliminate the indigenous population, or you have to keep fighting them, because no indigenous population willingly gives up their land and their way of life. And who he was talking to, can you go back? Who he was talking to were Zionists in the labor Zionist tradition who were saying, well, we want to establish a colonial state, but we can also give Palestinians some rights. And he was saying, you can't have it both ways. You can't both take land and suppress and create a second-class citizenry and an apartheid state, and say that you're giving people rights and that you're going to live as equals. That can't exist in the same place. And of course, that has been the history that we've seen play out. And Begin, Sharon, Netanyahu, Barak, they have all followed Jabotinsky as the roadmap for Israeli, not only military, but state policies and practices. And what it lays out, which is what we're seeing now, is that one, you get the backing of a large state power, which of course first was the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and now is the United States, but not only, and we'll talk a little bit about how Israel has diversified and has been very useful to multiple state powers, repressive regimes, and forms of imperialism. Then you have to have a very strong military that you not only use against the indigenous population, but around the surrounding states. Many people refer to Israel as a military with a state. It has one of the largest, strongest, most powerful militaries in the world, of course, backed by the United States, the military might of the world. And then you work and negotiate, and with the United States, leverage aid, economic interests, and military might to also establish client governments in other places in the region that will support your agenda in the region, right? It's not unique to Palestine. This is what the US has done with Europe all over the world, and Great Britain all over the world. And then there's ongoing ethnic cleansing. And so at the time of the Nakba, the catastrophe, the founding of the State of Israel, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced, which was 85% of the Palestinian population, and a minimum of 15,000 Palestinians were killed. So genocide is at the roots of the founding of the State of Israel. And as Jabotinsky warned, in a way, and pronounced, it has been the ongoing work of the State of Israel, and it is very clear that the ultimate goal, as Golda Meir and others said, is from the sea to the river, maintaining all of historic Palestine as a Jewish state. And if this wasn't clear before, certainly this year has clarified that that is the objective of the Zionist project in historic Palestine, right? And so really we share this to say, and you asked about Jewish Voice for Peace, there isn't really a middle ground. You are either anti-racist or you are complicit with racism. You are either anti-Zionist or you are complicit with Zionism. And that's not to say that there's not useful work. I mean, we were part of a constellation of organizations, particularly Palestinian organizations, that pulled over 15 years Jewish Voice for Peace towards anti-Zionism. And they've now sent out a public message about it, which is very important, and they do work that we don't do. They move people from Zionism to anti-Zionism. We do work that's about dismantling Zionism, and our work clarifies that that is an option. It's not just liberal Zionism to reactionary Zionism. There are a growing number of Jewish people who are committed to the full dismantling of Zionism and an end to the state of Israel. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next one. Okay. So all of us have reasons why we're part of the Palestinian movement. First and foremost, of course, it's because we are seeing a cutting, like they are at the front line of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, anti-apartheid struggle. And they are at the heart of how that is playing out around resource control, military control, and economic control in that region, but also globally. And so in addition to our solidarity with the Palestinian people, on principle, right? On principles of basic humanity, you don't even need politics to stand on principles of basic humanity. We also have a case against Zionism because of the relationship that Israel has with the United States, with India, with China, with Europe, with Canada, with both neoliberal and authoritarian governments. Israel is playing a very big role in providing arms and buying arms, and themselves boast that they test their technology, their military strategy, their weaponry in live time on Palestinians, and that's part of how they market their role in the repression industry. 65% of drones are produced by the state of Israel and exported internationally. Over time and place, which I'll talk about next, Israel has partnered to attack people's movements all over the world and to support regimes and governments in attacking their own people. In Germany, in the United States, all over the world, police forces are sent to Israel to be trained by the Israeli military in population control. And in the United States, we can go to the next slide. In the United States, what was I going to say about that? It'll come back. But Israel's role in surveillance technology, in the use of AI for genocide, these are things that are coming back to all of us, right? In different ways and at different levels. In different moments of time, different ones of us are targeted in different ways. But what's happening in Gaza around the desire to control the pipeline under Gaza, right? And the just total environmental destruction of Gaza for that resource, and the ethnic cleansing and genocide is a pattern that many of us are preparing for as we see a depletion of natural resources in this world, increasing chaos of the environment, and ever growing fascism and authoritarianism, and those things coming together. And Gaza is an example of the way our governments are working together against us. And so our fight for Palestinians is on principle for their liberation, right? And all of our collective humanity. But practically, it's also because our liberation is tied up with each other. Our survival, the planet's survival, is tied up with each other. And Israel is playing a job with our governments against us. And so that's the bigger fight we're in when we are targeting Zionism, in addition to being in solidarity with Palestine. We have a stake in it. We have a stake in it. Okay. Go to the next one. You all could probably talk to me more about this, but again, this has become even more clear that far-right governments that are racist, including anti-Semitic, find themselves very supportive of the state of Israel and Zionism. At the same time, they're anti-Semitic. And Israel and Zionism finds alliance with them despite their anti-Semitism. Because Zionism has always used anti-Semitism to advance its own interests, right? You know, when Loki says nothing is more anti-Semitic than Zionism, that's what he's talking about. Next one. I'm from the United States, obviously. Zionism and Israel play a central, if not the central role in advancing US imperialism all over the world. And Joe Biden said, you know, in naming himself a Zionist, in the middle of this horrific genocide, he says, if there were no Israel, no Jew in the world would be ultimately safe. It's the only ultimate guarantee. What is he saying when he says that? When Western leaders all over the world say this, particularly given how unsafe actually everyone is made by Israel in that region, why aren't we safe other places in the world? That is a very anti-Semitic framework. And it's used to remind people, particularly Jewish people in the United States who play a particular role in terms of electoral politics, that the only way they're safe is if there's a place for us to go. That's a very anti-Semitic framework. But he also said, if there was no Israel, we would have to create one. Israel is so useful to us. If Israel didn't exist, the United States would have to create it. And when Netanyahu just came and spoke to Senate, what he said was, we are your boots on the ground. Get real. You will never stop funding us. You can never ultimately put any kinds of restrictions on what we do, because we do a job for you that you can't get anywhere else. And he's right. And so, you know, even what we call the Democrats, the neoliberal part of the government, is that. And then, of course, the next one, sorry. And then, of course, Israel partners with not only neoliberal governments, but authoritarian and fascist governments all over the world. So you've got Modi and their shared Islamophobia and the Hindu fascist movement that doesn't only provide, it's not just that Israel provides weapons to India. They compete with China to be the largest purchasers of Israeli arms. But not only do they do damage there and attack movements there, but in the United States and particularly in Great Britain, they work together, Zionists and Hindu fascist organizations there, to not only attack anti-caste, anti-Hindu fascism, anti-Zionist movements, but really to help set immigration policies that prevent people coming into the United States or London who are from Muslim or Islamic countries or populations. They have a very active racist agenda that they're working on at a policy level in the United States and probably in Germany, and also
Czech Republic.
Yes, I mean, we'll get to the Czech Republic. And then, of course, Bolsonaro, Duterte, Netanyahu has a very close relationship with all of these governments, and they all rely on Israel for the tools, but also the strategies of repression. Okay, next one. And then white supremacists, and particularly Christian Zionists, which I'll get to in a minute, look to Israel as a model for an ethnically pure state. And that's something we hear a lot from in the United States from white nationalists. I'm going to skip this. So then we can go to several. There you go. Great. Thank you. So we share the general complaint against Zionism. But as Jewish people, we also have our own complaints. So of course the first is violence being done in our name that strips everyone of our humanity. We are watching live a genocide. And the world leaders are sending a very clear message. It's not the only genocide happening in the world, but it is one of the most documented, and it is literally being watched live every day. The attack on humanity and the message from governments that there's a green light for this kind of genocide with full knowledge, full visuals, full documentation, is a very dangerous message to the future, right? Israel planting bombs in technology used by civilians every day in Lebanon has opened a Pandora's box that you can't get back from. Those kind of strategies introduce forms of civilian targeting that then exponentially grows. And that being done in our name is our main complaint. But there's so many other pieces, it is Zionists who have conflated Jewish with Zionism. And of course that was their strategy. And it was very seal-proof, right? Because it claimed that Zionism was the solution for anti-Semitism. And then when people challenge Zionism, they're being anti-Semitic. And then when people conflate Judaism or being Jewish with Zionism, they're being anti-Semitic. But that conflation was at the very core of the Zionist propaganda, and it continues to be. The other piece here is that obviously Zionism is anti-Semitic. It has and continues to collaborate with anti-Semites then and now, particularly with Christian Zionists. It also displaced all of the Jews living in coexistence and in diaspora in the region. It was the Zionist movement that went into Iraq, went into Morocco, and took actions, bombed synagogues, to create a perception of threat that would then force Jewish people or greatly encourage Jewish people at a perceived threat to their lives to go to Israel. And then it actively destroys and uses those populations in the military and other ways. And now, of course, Swana Jews are very much part of the government in the state of Israel. But the biggest thing that it does is it takes the Jewish history of persecution and genocide, and then it defends the genocide in Palestine, which I know is like a simple statement that we see all the time. But at its core, that is a very anti-Semitic thing to do. Because we know that the Czech Republic, that the German government, that the United States government, that the British government, this isn't about Jewish safety for them. This has nothing to do with their solidarity or their lessons learned from their collaboration with the Nazi genocide. This is about their state interests. This is about their military and economic interests. And so they're using our history against another people for the purposes of advancing their interests. And that's how Jewish people have been used again and again throughout history. And Israel does that for us on a state level. Israel takes that anti-Semitic dynamic and put it into a state form. So those are some of our complaints. Let's go to the next slide. So there's a long history of Zionists sharing interests with anti-Semites. Balfour himself, who wrote the Balfour Declaration, said, I'll sign this declaration because I don't want those Bolshevik Jews coming here and making trouble, right? During the Nazi genocide, there's some very good books about this. Lenny Brenner wrote a very good book, very well documented on the Nazi transfer agreements, and Kershnar was a Hungarian Jew who was tried in the state of Israel and ultimately assassinated by the Mossad when he went to Berlin. He was one example of many of Zionist leaders who facilitated the moving of Hungarian Jews onto the trains and into what he said refugee camps, but were concentration camps. And he did that in exchange for getting 30 Zionist leaders and arms and weaponry and money to the state of Israel. And so he was tried and found guilty in the state of Israel, and then ultimately Mossad assassinated him, but it's a total contradiction, right? Because it was the Zionist movement that made this happen, but then they needed and wanted a scapegoat once the evidence was produced that that had been part of the building of the state of Israel. It was the Zionists who first broke the boycott against Nazis. There's a very long history of that, so I won't go too far into it, but even with the Argentine junta, Israel supported the junta government, even though a lot of that junta government were Nazis who had left Nazi Germany and moved to Argentina. And what they said was, we are going to support the junta, but the place we want you to send the Jews who you will let get out and who want to get out, we want you to send them to Israel. And so there's a very long history of this, and the Jewish activists who are in IJAN in Argentina have done a lot of that work and documentation. And then of course today there are very strong partnerships with not only Christian Zionists, but explicit white nationalists, including the president just elected to the United States, Trump and his cabinet. So the next. So this is Steve Bannon. He was part of Trump's first cabinet. He's speaking at the Zionist Organization of America. Bannon is a very well-known anti-Semitic kind of political pundit. They invited him there and gave him an award. Donald Trump was invited to speak at Fighting Anti-Semitism in America. This is Donald Trump who said at this speech, and many times during this election, Jewish people really should vote for me, and not enough of you are really voting for me. But if I lose, watch, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to be safe. And this is someone who has provoked insurrections in the United States, right? And he's finding the people he's targeting, and so he's both using anti-Semitism to say he's fighting anti-Semitism, which is also like a lot of states in Europe, right? It's that contradiction. Okay, and then Christian Zionism, next one please. So in the United States there are 30 million Christian Zionists. I am positive you have many Christian Zionists in the Czech Republic. That was the first thing my son noticed. He was like, Mama, there's a lot of crosses here on all the statues. And I was like, yes, this is a very Christian history. There's also a Jewish history. Okay, there's other histories too, but there's a lot of crosses. And so there's a lot of Christian Zionism in the United States, and they give the most funding and the most political support to Zionism, certainly more than Jewish Zionists, which is not to deny the amount of support, of course, there is within Jewish community. But what is so outrageous about this collaboration is that Christian Zionism is based on this idea of like, we're all waiting for all the Jews to go to the promised land so that the Messiah will come, everyone will die, and we can reign. So it's like the ultimate, hatred of humanity, but also anti-Semitism, also Jews, but not only Jews. And he said God sent Adolf Hitler to help Jews reach the promised land. And what's so awful about that is that that was some of the organizing that Zionists did. Zionism started way before the Nazi genocide, as we all know, but it used the Nazi genocide very well. And it used that opportunity to reinforce the need for a Jewish state. And the truth is, if people had wanted to build a Jewish state in Berlin, go for it. You want to build a Jewish state, a nationalist state in response to anti-Semitism? Germany would have been a good place for it, not Palestine. So, we're against the idea of an ethnic Jewish state, but the point being that Zionists organized in the United States to turn boats of refugees away, because they wanted to make the point that you will only be safe if you have a state that is your own. And there are so many examples of this in London, in the United States, of the collaboration and the transfer agreements that I previously talked about. And so that is another example of the anti-Semitism of Zionism. So we can go to the next one. Okay, so I think people understand that anti-Semitism is a specific idea, and when we mean, because Semites are a bigger group of people, but when we're talking about anti-Semitism, we're talking about the European construction of the hatred of Jews that was created in Germany in the late 1700s. And what's important is that it's a system of ideas and policies that are passed down through institutions, and that scapegoat Jews in different times and places and result in different kinds of targeting. Okay? Next one, please. What's important about this is that it involves state power. It involves using of state and cultural institutions against Jewish people. Next one. What it is not is criticism of Israel, support for Palestinian rights, or the rejection of Zionism. So we do a lot of work, next slide please, combating the way that anti-Semitism gets weaponized and gets misused. And in the United States, and I'm sure the same is true here, anti-Semitism is the first charge that is hurled at people who support Palestine, who challenge Israel, and who reject Zionism. And it's also hurled at Jewish people, right? Being Jewish doesn't stop that accusation, but it does show how absurd it is. And that's one of the important reasons for Jewish people to be very clear and very public about our rejection of Zionism. Because Palestinians don't need us to reject Zionism to have a liberation movement. But we want to create room for all the people who oppose Zionism and are in solidarity with Palestinians to be able to do that with the least amount of repression possible. And so that's a big part of the work we do. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's really important to note that there's a whole way in which Jewish people in the United States talk about feeling unsafe when people criticize Israel or challenge Zionism. And there's a big difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. And it sounds simple, but Zionist students in the United States keep filing complaints with the Department of Education saying, I'm unsafe. I walked by a Palestine solidarity protest. It makes me feel unsafe. I feel like I'm threatened. And of course, the irony is that literally, Palestinian students and universities are being decimated, and the criticism of a nation state that's committing genocide makes people feel unsafe. Well, it should absolutely make you feel uncomfortable that you are defending a state that commits genocide. That does not make you unsafe, right? If anything, it is Zionism that makes the world increasingly unsafe for a lot of people, including Jewish people. So that is a lot of our work. Hayo Meyer is a survivor of Auschwitz. How many people are familiar with Hayo Meyer? Okay. So he was a member of IJAN, and we did a tour with him in 2010 called Never Again for Anyone, and then again all over Europe, and then again in the United States and Canada in 2011. Hayo talked a lot about the way in which Zionism in the state of Israel was so incredibly disrespectful and showed so much disdain for the survivors of the Nazi genocide and the people who died in the Nazi genocide. And so of course they use that history. Once again, it's these contradictions. They use that history, but they also talked about, we're not going to be like those shtetl Jews in Europe that went willingly to their death. We are going to be militarized, and if you've ever seen the images of the early Zionist propaganda, it is literally like, it couldn't look more like Nazi propaganda. You literally could have just transposed it. Blue, very Aryan looking, very militarized, lots of fists, lots of weapons, lots of command of the land. we are going to be different than those shtetl Jews. And Hayo talked a lot about that. Next one. Okay, so this is a video of Hayo speaking in the House of Parliament and talking about how obscene this was for him, to watch the genocide being committed in the name of his experience and the number on his arm by the very state that completely disrespects his own history. And one of the ways it gets disrespected is by using it against another people. I don't know if people want to see this right now. It's a 5-minute clip. Or if you want to keep going here. Yeah? Let's see if people can hear it.
But then they concluded wrongly that there would have been the first human being of Aryan descent, and the Aryan was invented, and also the Semite was invented. Now, the Aryan, if you are here in Great Britain, you're all talking English, but you have completely different ethnic backgrounds. So, it is the conqueror who determines which language is taught, and not the ethnic background of the population. And the human races were also, they did a hell of a lot to measure the relative length and width and height of the human brain. And made again a fatal error in thinking that a different brain would also have a different character, different morals, and what have you. And it had nothing, and therefore they invented the inferior and superior races, and the Aryan and Semitic race. Now, Aryan race doesn't exist at all. Semitic race doesn't all, and certainly the Jews are not Semitic race, because the Jews are genetically one of the most mixed groups which are only united due to a socio-cultural heritage, but no way by coming from Palestine, or no way by having the same genes. Okay. But the inferior and superior races idea underpinned the long-standing colonialism, and so you see that there, because now they could be colonialistic without feeling guilty, and that has also entered as one of the main fundamentals of Zionism. The colonialism. Don't be afraid to be colonial. There are cockroaches, as we heard. They, in this case, are the Palestinians. And to top it off, to make it even worse, the Holocaust occurred, and the Holocaust religion was invented by the high priest Elie Wiesel, and we now talk about that, and it made it all even worse than it already was. Especially, so the mission of the Holocaust is supported by the Holocaust religion. Especially in Israel, but not only there, Judaism has been substituted by the Holocaust religion. Its content, if any, is we Jews have a monopoly on suffering. Yes. Nobody has ever suffered or will suffer like the Jews have. So, therefore, once more, and I can underpin it with quotations from all sorts of prominent Israelis. Nobody has ever suffered or will suffer like the Jews have. Therefore, whatever we do to Palestinians is less than what we suffered and can be done without feeling guilty. And to make it clear, completely clear, to everybody here in this room, that it is a religion. Elie Wiesel said literally, Auschwitz Sinai is a symbol for the in the story in the Bible that Moses, Moshe, whatever you want to call it, how do you call it in English? Moses went up the Mount Sinai, and God Himself gave him these stone tables with the 10 Commandments. So the very basis of Judaism. So if Auschwitz, according to High Priest Wiesel, is comparable to Sinai, this means exactly what I said before. Judaism has been substituted by Holocaust. And now I come to my own personal interpretation of Auschwitz, and I recommend that you rather follow that. Totally opposite to his interpretation, who once more implicitly says, because we Jews have a monopoly of suffering, we can do what we want to anybody, and that is laid down, actually, in Israel's Dahi doctrine, which I mentioned before, and the Dahi doctrine has been very well described in the document by the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, PCATI, and various Israeli generals have it formulated, and the formulations are like that. Dahiya, by the way, was a part of is a suburb of Beirut, and during the second Lebanon war, this was a war because the army nearly lost it. The other one in Gaza is a massacre, but during the second Lebanon war, shots were shot from Dahiya. And what did the Israeli occupation force do? They bombed Dahiya to complete rubble. And this was reframed in the course of the last year by various Israeli generals who said, we will consciously and very certainly now use any attack on us will be answered disproportionately. And the disproportionate retaliation will be such that the population which lets other aggressive types shoot on us, that the population will be so collectively punished that they will fight their own people, that they should not aggress Israel. So that is the Dahiya doctrine. And okay, now.
So this wasn't the clip that I particularly wanted to show you, but what he's saying is so important because it's once again the bringing together of two impossible things, like Jabotinsky spoke about in the beginning, of like, we're part of we're a country that supports human rights and democracy, but we're an advanced colonial project. We believe that Jews are only safe completely in isolation, but we are the answer to anti-Semitism. And in this, it's like the Holocaust is the first thing by saying we are the only ones who have suffered like this. It's already separating us from all the people all over the world who have fought against their own and other people's genocides. It separates us from humanity. And then at the same time, what he goes on to say is, it has utter disdain for the survivors and those who perished in the Nazi genocide, but it's very willing to use it. It's secular, but it speaks to the right within the Bible. And so, like all nation states, propaganda plays a very big role. Next slide.
But then they completely wrongly.
Yeah. So one of the biggest tools that that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance created a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel and, of course, anti-Zionism. And all over the world, that has been used to target students, to attack academic freedom, and now is being used in much more serious ways. So in the United States, a resolution was passed that said anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. Now, it's not legislated yet, but that resolution has been used by college campuses, by corporations, by workplaces, so that if a midwife at a hospital in San Francisco, Palestinian midwife, wears a watermelon pin, she's put on permanent leave. She's put on leave. When she comes back, if she wears the pin again, she's put on leave again. A teacher who speaks about the genocide in Palestine is put on permanent leave. Apple workers, baristas at cafes are terminated. Jewish counselors are terminated for wearing a shirt that says ceasefire, genocide is bad. Fired at a Jewish summer camp that brings Israeli soldiers in to speak to campers. On a Delta Airlines, a passenger was wearing a shirt that said Jews for ceasefire. 2 air marshals approached him and said, if you don't take your shirt off, we're going to land this plane and you're going to be escorted by police and detained. He takes the shirt off. 2 hours later, he's cold. He puts the shirt back on. He's approached again and says, you have to put your shirt on. As soon as we land, you will be arrested. He puts the shirt back on. He lands. They give him a citation for wearing a shirt that says ceasefire. So in Germany, we just found out that this definition is also being used for naturalization and immigration processes.
Or for revocation of citizenship as well.
Right. I was going to say, you want to
Including
say?
for Jews. I, for example, as a Jewish person, was questioned about I had to admit to being Jewish to the German citizenship authorities when I was having my interview for citizenship after being a long-term resident there. And in addition to admitting to being Jewish, having been racially profiled by those authorities, I had to then answer questions about my relationship with the state of Israel.
Right, but it's selective, right?
It's selective.
Who has to...
It's selective who has to do it, but it is being almost exclusively applied and used in cases of Jewish people or brown people, black people, people from the global south, and predominantly people from Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, of course, Palestine. And it's very convenient because Germany is utilizing this now. Germany usually, up to now, had a process where it took 8 years to get citizenship, and very conveniently, let's remember who came to Germany 8 years ago, many, many people from Syria and Lebanon, for example, many of whom are people who are stateless because they actually are Palestinians who were Lebanese, who were living in Lebanon or Syria, not all, but many. And now, at this juncture, when they're applying for citizenship, they are being questioned, interrogated, and denied or given a whole variety of problems, or this could also now result in actually being deported.
And so the Anti-Defamation League is an organization in the United States, like many Jewish institutions in the United States that once served Jewish community. Now many of them exist only to defend and support the state of Israel and to silence criticism of Israel or solidarity with Palestine. And so in their own words, the goal is to mobilize law enforcement, administration, government, and institution to use this definition to call the experience of Palestinians anti-Semitic. When a Palestinian speaks to the racism they experience, the genocide their family is experiencing, they are labeled as anti-Semitic. And so one of the things that we're working on, can we go to the next slide? Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one and then I'll come back to this actually. We're working on a campaign called The Right to Reject Zionism. And so one of the things we're trying to do is defend people who are being targeted, particularly by their employers, by their school administrations. And we're working as lawyers and activists, both on legal cases, but really importantly on narrative cases, and then really trying to defend people. Like there's a Palestinian cafe where we live called the Jerusalem Cafe. A Zionist came in with a Star of David hat, went and sat next to people and started to harass them. They were asked to leave and escorted out. And then of course they worked with the Anti-Defamation League, which claims to exist for the purposes of stopping anti-Semitism, but really instead weaponizes anti-Semitism to silence criticism of Palestine. And so they put out a piece and they filed a complaint with the police that what happened was a hate crime. A hate crime. So in the United States, a hate crime gives you much higher charges. So if you're an activist and you get a civil disobedience charge, right, like trespassing, if they add hate crime to it, it becomes a felony. A misdemeanor becomes a felony when you add a hate crime. And so our work is as Jewish people and as civil rights organizations is to like organize a press release or a press conference in front of the cafe that says, the Anti-Defamation League, these Zionist organizations, are using the protections we fought and won to undermine those protections and to protect the people that hate crimes was supposed to be used against, right? So it is using hate crimes against the people who are supposed to be protected by racism, from racism, Palestinians, or to protect protected speech. Anti-Zionism is a form of protected speech, it's anti-racism. And instead of using that to protect us, it's being used to protect the people who are speaking and acting in very racist ways. And so that's the kind of work we're doing as a coalition of Palestinians, Jews, Christians, political organizations, civil rights, legal organizations, students, faculty, and really our goal is to push back on this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism and instead to work on anti-Zionism as protected speech and protected political organizing. That's ultimately our goal. So let's go back right here. So Zionisms have always used anti-Semitism as a weapon, but after October 7th, they really accelerated and intensified this. And the reason they did this is because the resistance was actually successful in the sense that it broke through the iron wall. And Israel has always bragged that what happened on October 7th was not possible. And so, not only that, but it shattered this idea, this myth, that Zionism in Israel is a safe place for Jewish people. Anyone who has been there understands that it is such a militarized society. Like, I watch these settler families with like semi-automatics and their kids just walking around, or then every time I go into a cafe when I'm in historic Palestine, the number of, I don't think I've ever gone through, I live in the United States, one of the most violent places in the world, but I've never gone through as many metal detectors, right? There's so much fear. It's like this reinforced psychology. You're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe. And then Zionism just keeps reinforcing it. You're not safe. And then you hear these Jewish students in California being like, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. It's like this big propaganda machine, and the very thing that's not making you safe is the thing you're clinging to, right? Of course, Palestinians have paid such a high price for what is happening. But it is also true that Israel has been exposed and it will never go back. The next generation of anti-racists, the majority of young Jewish people will be anti-Zionist. But we have a big fight ahead of us. And one of the ways we're trying to fight is we are working internationally against the Israeli repression industry that partners with our own organizations. We are not saying here that Israel is controlling the military might of the world. Israel does a job. Israel's economy is very invested in the repression industry and the tech industry. That includes AI, that includes surveillance, right? And so we are working on arms embargoes, ending the police training, which is arranged, by the way, by the Anti-Defamation League. When did police training have anything to do with combating anti-racism? Just there, it shows how contradictory something like the Anti-Defamation League is. Boycott, divestment, sanctions. One of the organizations we work closely with is the Palestinian Youth Movement. They are launching a campaign called Masks Off Maersk. Maersk is a Swedish transport company. It transports goods all over the world. 8% of its income comes from the transportation of arms, including arms parts to Israel. And so it's an opportunity to break off that part and say, and boycott Maersk for that, or disrupt their production in different ways, right? So we're hoping that the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network in Europe, the UK, the US, and Canada are going to participate in this, and it's part of our work that we've done over the years on exposing what we call Israel's worldwide role in repression. The Palestinian Youth Movement is also building towards a people's arms embargo, and that's something that we will participate as well, so that workers, consumers, the general population can participate in different ways in targeting this repression industry. The reason we're focusing on corporations is it's very hard to convince the US military or our police institutions to cancel their contracts with Israel, right? We have to find targets that are affected by consumer action. And so that's part of what we're doing. So these are just examples. Many people are familiar with Elbit. Members of IGEN have participated in the sabotage of these companies. 3 factories in the UK have been shut down with Palestine Action leading that way. Next. Lockheed. These are healthcare workers that we work with. Every sector has a role to play in isolating Israel, just as they did in the South African anti-apartheid struggle. Nurses and doctors have been so active, and one of our members in London in the UK is a doctor who was a South African doctor who was part of the anti-apartheid struggle there, and is now part of the anti-apartheid and anti-colonial struggle in Palestine, is working on isolating Israel from the World Health Organizations, medical associations. There's no room for genocidal governments and institutions in any of the networks we're part of. Next one. And then No Tech for Apartheid. We're Google workers, Amazon workers organizing to combat a contract, Project Nimbus, which is a $3.4 billion contract that Google has with the state of Israel to provide AI that is being used for very targeted assassinations and genocide on the ground. Next one. So ultimately, what we're looking for is a departure from the ways that Zionism replicates history. Zionism is a continuation of racism, and we want a departure from it. It is a continuation of colonization. We want a departure from it. It is a continuation, and it advances fascism, and we want a departure from it. It is also a continuation of anti-Semitism, and we are looking for a different future. And as Jewish people, we want our history of resistance to fascism and of survival of it, and the legacy of the ancestors we lost to it, to be part of movements for liberation and not work against them. And that is ultimately what our activity is. We work in different kinds of political work. We are always looking at the way in which Zionism relates to queer liberation. Many of us are queer and trans people who organize in IJAN. How it relates to the environment. You just look at Gaza to see what is coming and what's already happening all over the world, right? All over the African continent, Israel, China, the United States, they are working on resource control and extraction to great devastation. So the next one is our last one. And so, in the words of Hayo, never again has to mean never again for anyone, or it really literally means nothing at all. It just means nothing at all. Because if you can commit genocide in one place in time against any people, you can and you will do it again at another place in time. In the United States, we stand on long legacies of genocide of African indigenous people. Our fight against Zionism also has to include and fight for decolonization of Turtle Island and abolition and support of the Black liberation movement. And that is true for our work across the world. And I think one of the things I will say in closing is we all want what's happening to stop. We want an end to this genocide. And it is also our responsibility to really work together at an international scale to not allow that to be in vain. The Palestinians have revived an international movement for human rights and dignity, and of course anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism, and we have a responsibility to work together and in solidarity with that and in joint struggle with it. So I thank you for everything you do every day and for being here to hear this. We intend to be a support to the work you all do in whatever ways we can. We are meeting with some people tomorrow who are exploring bringing IJAN to Czechia, and we hope that we can all do this together and play our different roles. And for us, while we use our Jewish voice, it is not more central than anyone else's opposition to Zionism. And so, thank you. Okay, and I have a couple of these are brochures that we developed that sort of outline why Zionism is racism and why anti-Zionism is anti-racism. We have a couple, and we can send you the file, and you can use it, translate it, whatever you want to do.
We have a little bit more time. Are there already questions, or do you want me to start? Okay.
I suppose I had two comments that I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on. When you talked about nothing could be as bad as the Holocaust, it's almost like a Holocaust scale of like what's happening there can't be as bad as that, so it's downplayed in that way. I was talking yesterday about the Genocide Convention and how that in itself was a reaction to the Holocaust.
Right.
That like it really is perfect in a way that the perpetrators of this violence today were the ones who suffered that, because it gives them the perfect excuse, the perfect guise to hide behind. Secondly, you talking about the difference between feeling unsafe and feeling uncomfortable with the movements in the US. Correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't looked up how many people, if any, have been like attacked by Palestinian protesters, but I don't think the number's very big. And I think in fact, it's a little crass to say, but I know that everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about when I say that the most dangerous part of being a Palestinian demonstrator in the US is that you can't handle what you've seen and your complicity in it, and you light yourself on fire. Like, I feel like that's more dangerous than, you know, like, I don't think these are violent protesters at all. You know what I'm saying? That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those protesters.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a couple things. Of course, the hierarchy of suffering is only used to divide us. We've experienced different things, and it's not to say they're all the same, but our suffering, the things we struggle around, is what unites us. And it's not just through our humanity and our common experience or on principle, it is because the enemies are the same. And so we need each other, right? And we're accountable to each other because of that. So that's absolutely true. And there's a whole thing about sort of how neoliberal states emerged and how human rights is part of protecting democracy and opposing genuine socialism, right? And so human rights became very much part of that, and Israel is very central to it, and the Holocaust got used, and it's a way of saying there are two choices: liberal capitalist democracies or fascism. Which one do you want? Right? And so that's the role that plays, which is not to say that human rights as a concept is not something we should lift up. Like, not the institutions, but the idea that human beings have rights that are essential is an important fight for us, right? It's just that the institutions weren't actually created to do that. And yes, the Holocaust being at the center of that, and then controlling its use, not only against, not only to prevent criticisms of Israel, but also other allies, right, including the United States. So at the Durban Convention against all forms of racism, the Black Liberation Movement had done a lot of work at that to bring to that Durban conference a complaint against the history of racism and to demand reparations. Palestinians and South Africans had organized to bring back the Zionism is Racism Declaration. The President of the United States said, Bill Clinton, said, I'm not going to Durban because we are allied with Israel, and that's anti-Semitism. But the real reason the US government didn't want to go to this convention is because it did not want to have to respond to the body of evidence and the demand for reparations. But then it used that to try to separate and say, see, the Palestinians are doing it again, they're ruining it for everyone. And so it's that divide and conquer. And then that is why I kept emphasizing anti-Semitism has always been, the roots of anti-Semitism are in white nationalism and Christian supremacy. The Palestinian struggle is an anti-racist struggle, and I think all of our experience has been that it's a very principled struggle. And it opposes all forms of racism. Do you sometimes hear comments based on the conflation that Zionism does itself, maybe sometimes, but I don't know of a single instance of Jewish people or Jewish protesters being attacked by Palestinians. Anti-Semitism in the United States is perpetrated by white nationalists. That's who perpetrates anti-Semitism, and that's also who perpetrates the vast amount of Islamophobia, but Zionists are getting right in there. So, yes.
I really think if there were Jewish people being attacked in the US by Palestinian protesters, you most certainly would hear about it on CNN and
Yes.
what have you. And the fact that we don't, I think, speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there another one? Yes, in the back. Okay. Yeah.
I have a question. Oh, it's not a question, maybe. You said that the anti-Semitism started in the 17th century in Germany, or it's a definition?
1789, yeah.
Yeah, 1789.
Johnny Marr.
Well, I would like to argue that actually the European Christendom is actually the first anti-Semitic.
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but they started like from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's just, what I have a little problem with is, you know, my grandmothers were both Christians and I would never call myself Christian. And if it wouldn't be helpful to start like Jewish people culturally, but you are American and she's American. I am Czech or European and the Jew is, or Jewish culture is also a German or, you know, so like, because we are going still through like, you know, the Herzl, Zionism and the Nazis saying you are a Jew because your grandmother was so weak, we can, and I think we should starting like we are people.
Right.
I'm not Christian because my grandmothers were Christians. I'm not. I was a Buddhist, I was an atheist, and I'm now Indian, whatever, mysticism. And I think we are playing into it because they can say, oh, well, your grandmother was Jewish, so you have to be either pro-Israel or you're either, I don't know, what do they call it, unhappy Jews?
Self-hating Jews.
Self-hating Jews? I mean, shouldn't we stop this? Like, this is really bonkers. We are still playing in the Nazi propaganda and Zionist propaganda. You to me are a person, and you to me are also a person, and I hope I'm a person, a European. I'm white, unfortunately. What can I do about it? But, you know, I'm anti-colonial, and I'm anti-imperialism, and I'm not a Christian, and I don't want to be Christian, and the culture is here. And if you want to bring some, I don't know, maybe could the Jewish cultural heritage come here and say you want the houses back and everything? Maybe there would be a little bit uproar and you could see the anti-Semitism in its real, like, this is an anti-Semitic country. Or like, really, you have at least a lot of Jewish people there, or cultural Jewish people, who are fighting. Here's no one. Like, it's 1,400 of us. Maybe, or just thousand. So I just have like, can we just start saying we are people and we want to live in peace?
Thank you.
And not being Jews, not being Christians, and you know, if you're not practicing, if you're practicing, fine. But it's a religion. You're not like a, you know, this is Zionism saying Jews are people. No, it's your religion, fine. If you are of Jewish religion and you follow the 614 rules and whatever, fine, absolutely with me. And if you're Christian going to the church, fine. But I'm not Christian, and I don't want to be called Christian just because I live in this God-forsaken country.
Thank you.
Sorry,
But
that was my
look,
question.
next
No,
year.
I'll respond. Go ahead.
Okay, first, thank you so much for your presentation. I have one question. I know it's difficult to answer, probably. But what do you think if no exists Sykes-Picot Declaration and Great Syria still exists? I mean, like could continue when was birth, and because King Faisal was for some like state or something like this for the Jewish people. So what do you think? It's what happened after?
If there was no Sykes-Picot agreement, and Palestine was,
Sykes-Picot, got
yeah,
it.
and Palestine stayed part of Syria.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Okay.
It was only the second betrayal of the Arab people.
Yeah,
third,
I mean,
actually.
well,
Was the
are there
man-
other people who have questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I recently met an Israeli MP, Gopher, something like, he has been recently suspended for 6 months from the Israeli Knesset, and he's a leftist, right?
Yeah.
Very nice guy, but there was some kind of a confusion when I was speaking to him. So they say that they believe in the Israel's right to exist, right? But at the same time, the dichotomy is they say that they are for the right of return, and they want things in the future. The name can be change of the state, and it can be a democratic state for everyone, right? So it's just like there were too many things that are being said by the Israeli leftists, right? So my question is that, do you guys have any kind of agreement, disagreement? What's the equation between those leftist groups who are politically active in Israel and your group?
Yeah. Okay. Should I respond to those? Okay. So, I mean, I honestly just feel like, of course, the colonization of Palestine by the Zionist movement stands on the British colonization of Palestine and the entire breakup of the region by European colonialism. I don't feel like, as an anti-Zionist Jewish organizer, that it is that useful for me to comment on the relationship of other Arab nations in relationship to Palestine. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but there's so many betrayals that are also very based on the relationships that those various states have to the United States and or to ethnic conflict internally that they're controlling in various ways, but mostly, and to their own power, right? And Europe, of course. So I'm not sure if there's a more specific question, but I don't feel like I'm the right person to comment on how that history could go different. I don't feel like that's my place. I did spend a lot of time talking about it. We spend a lot of time talking about it with our comrades from the region, but we spend a lot of time listening. That's not the role that we play. We really keep our politics very specific to the relationship between Zionism and other struggles that we're part of, if that makes sense. And then, we get, in the beginning, that's Zionism, right? We don't believe Israel has a right to exist. We are totally uninterested in a Jewish state. Colonial or quite frankly otherwise. That's not the kind of liberation that we're part of. That's not even the Palestinian liberation that we've been part of. It's a broader struggles for liberation, right? And Zionism is not a progressive nationalism. It is a reactionary nationalism. We did have relationships when we started. We worked with anti-Zionist Jews inside of 48, but it became really hard because for a lot of them, they were fighting internal relations of powers between Jewish people, which is right. There's a lot of racism within Jewish society inside of Israel. There's a lot of class difference. But for Jews all over the world, our primary role around Zionism has to be to target Zionism and its impact on Palestinians and to follow that struggle. And so we don't really work inside of 48 because there's not a viable anti-Zionist movement. The world would welcome it and we would love to support it, and we've talked about going there to meet with people again. but there isn't really an anti-Zionist movement inside of Israel. And so to us, that kind of MP is not, is like some of our Democratic MP, like our Democratic senators, right? Who are liberal and have some good policies, but ultimately are invested in the maintenance of the United States as it is now, both internally and in relationship to other places in the world. Which is not to say there's not a difference. There's a big difference between what the Trump administration is saying about the rights of people inside of the United States and other people. But the agenda is very similar between the Democrats and the Republicans as it relates to Israel or global relations. And I think that's also true in Israel, right?
If I can
Did that
add,
answer your question? Yeah.
if I can add to that, you know, there are actually many leftist, you know, Israelis who are very critical about the occupation, are, you know, against all of this, what's been happening, against what's been happening in Gaza. But the same people start having a problem when you start talking about the right of return. You know, it's...
Or the right to resist.
Yeah. But the right of return, you know, because this would dismantle for them this... they don't see maybe it as a white supremacist state, but they still have this internal scare of if they're not the majority maybe. You know, so it's very difficult, yeah, to find really, you will find activists, you will find scholars, but an organization.
Well, or a movement that approaches the Palestinian struggle and says, how can we be in joint struggle against this entity that hasn't existed. Did you want to say something? And I want to respond to this too, but go ahead.
To that, I think it's very important whenever we talk about the right, the quote-unquote right to exist, to see the inherent contradiction and hypocrisy about not just within Israeli society, but also the weaponization of the idea of a right to exist. In Germany, for example, just because that's my context where I'm living, anyone who denies or even questions or speaks about this idea of a right to exist of Israel also is, you know, can be have that used against them. But we have to realize that that's not a right that's enumerated in international law in any way. So it's a political principle, but it's not a right. I mean, human beings have a right to exist, but no states have a right to exist. Neither Czechia, nor the United States, nor Guatemala, nor Japan, anything. And yet, as Sarah was mentioning, that's kind of remarkable actually, because you know that shows this inherent contradiction in how all of these mechanisms and institutions were set up allegedly to protect democracy and human rights, and yet here we have kind of proof that that's really not the case at all. And then even when these international institutions such as the UN saying that there is a right to, any people have a right to defend themselves, as Palestinians do from their occupiers, or already the UN having said that the right to return is enumerated and recognized by the General Assembly, and yet the right to exist isn't a thing that even exists within the body of international law. States either exist or they don't.
Yeah.
They either exist or they don't, according to the Montevideo Convention, and they have to have four different, they have to possess four different characteristics. But it has nothing to do with the right. They just exist or don't. So, yeah.
Francesca Albanese was commenting on this.
Sorry?
Yes.
Francesca Albanese was
When she said
down.
Israel exists. It exists. It's a thing.
This question is
But
a way
it's not
of
a right.
intimidation of everyone
Absolutely.
who wants to speak for
Challenge.
Palestinian rights and challenge, exactly.
And that's an important thing because it's not an opinion. It doesn't actually matter if people have an opinion on whether something or someone or some entity or state has a right to exist or not. I'm not even expressing an opinion. I'm just saying under international law that isn't a right that's enumerated. Period. It's just not there.
Plus, if you say it does have the which the one who's asking you wants to hear from you, that you know, like some kind of basic respect for human rights. That's what they're implying. But if you confirm this, you're basically saying that the Zionists had the right to ethnically cleanse Palestine in 1948, which they didn't, by any right.
Right, but politically, a state that commits genocide has absolutely no right to exist. So yes, I mean, the like debate about whether states has a right to exist or not is not a very useful one, but it is important to acknowledge that states that commit genocide should be absolutely isolated and dismantled. And there is no mechanism for doing that. States that commit genocide are supported and given coverage, and so that's the fight. I think, like, yes, of course, there's a humanist core to all of this work, and I think all of us have a right to stand on the legacies as we understand them and define those for ourselves. And so people in IGEN define their relationship to being Jewish politically, historically, culturally, religiously, and in all different ways. And for us, it actually matters. It matters how our history is being used because it separates us from humanity. And so for me, I would like to be a human and be Jewish. I don't want to have to be human, not be Jewish, so I can be human. So I think what's more important in what you're saying to me is that at the end of the day, our experiences as human beings and our commitment to each other's survival and dignity and safety transcends any race, religion, nationality, and we have specific histories that we draw on as we do that. And for us, we draw on the history of our own struggle against our persecution, but also part of collective liberation, workers' movements across Europe, right? Collective struggles for liberation. And yes, I was saying the term anti-Semitism was coined in 1789, but anti-Semitism, I agree with you, predates 1789 by millenniums. So yes, and there's a long, the Czech Republic has such a specifically interesting history that I'm learning more about when it comes to this question.
Maybe I have one question, if there is no question right now. We often hear from people who are maybe new to the support of Palestinians or Palestinian struggle, and they say, we're against the Israeli government, basically saying, but not the Israeli people, And I just wanted, since you're in even public health, right? Are you a psychologist? No.
I play one on TV. No, I have a master's in public health.
Okay, that's it.
Organizing requires a lot of psychological assessments, but it's public health. Yeah.
The question is, you visited, Palestine 48, and you spoke with, many Israelis, I imagine, and I have as well, and it's so difficult when the ideology, Zionism, is internal to identity, self-identity of the person. It's so difficult for them to, apart from that. I wanted to hear what do you think? This makes it so much difficult for the people in Israel to see the problem, the source of the problem.
Well, one of the impossible things about Zionist propaganda is that somehow Israel is the ultimate victor and the ultimate victim. And so that filters through the whole society, right? In the same way that Afrikaners had a very victim ideology of psychology of fleeing persecution and then apartheid. And I think, the other work that I do in the world, and this is the way that the macro and the intimate are in relationship to each other is that I do a lot of work around child sexual abuse, historically, and transformative justice. And it's like so many times, people who are violent to their spouses and abuse their children think of themselves as the victims. And then they're committing this great violence. And until that gets addressed, that violence won't stop. And that's true at a state level, and that's true at an intimate level. And that said, it isn't about we're not boycotting individual Israelis. We're boycotting companies, institutions, the government, right? Including academic institutions, cultural institutions, corporations, the government. And it will have an impact on Israelis just like October 7th does. But that violence, that impact, is created by the state of Israel. And so it's not about, that goes in both ways. It's not about the individuals, but also the resistance isn't about targeting individual Israelis. Does it impact individual Israelis? It does. But that's not its purpose. Its purpose is an anti-colonial fight with very few weapons available and very few tactics available. That's not personal either. So both are true. And again, in every moment of history, we have a choice. Like, you know, people all over Czechia resisted the Nazis and others went with them, right? That's also true in Germany. In South Africa, there were people in part of the anti-apartheid struggle. In the United States, there were people part of anti-slavery movements. But that doesn't mean that there's not like a structural relationship that has to be dismantled, and that as people hold on to that, they become part of that structure. So, you know, that is the work for Jewish people inside of Palestine, you know, historic Palestine to do. That's their work to do.
What I meant was more like when
Yeah.
you look at the polls,
Yeah,
you know, Israeli polls,
yeah,
you have like ranging from 70 to 90% of people supporting what was the genocide.
Yeah,
You know.
yes.
So the question is like, where do you separate what is the state and what is the will
Of the
this
people.
majority?
Right, well, I live in a
it-
state that just voted in a fascist who's gonna like attack so much of the
I
world.
know.
So it's, but that's the thing. It's like, unless you separate, maybe this is a different way to say it. Unless you separate yourself from the state and build a movement against it,
That's it.
then you are complicit and part of it. Particularly in Israel, like civilian is an interesting term. Like South Africa, people are conscripted into the military, right? But for all of us, we're all complicit if we're not actively fighting the power that we benefit from, whether we choose that benefit or not. And so, yes, I think the world would welcome a movement from 48 of Jewish people opposing their government in solidarity with Palestine. It's not happening,
Absolutely.
right? And so, like, no, I mean, I think we agree. I don't think we're saying
Yeah,
anything
no,
different. I just
yeah.
think it's like,
It-
it's not personal. October 7th was not personal.
Right. What I meant was like, we cannot wait
Yes.
for an Israeli movement,
Ah, I see what you're
Uh,
saying, right.
you know, to do this, to do what you know, Sarah and many Jewish organizations are now doing, you know, stepping against the state, but the whole ideology, which is not just the state structure, but like people that have to come to terms with the fact that this is wrong. This
And
is just-
isolate
Yeah.
Israeli and Zionist organizations. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, it was a good article by Michael Swartz, the Israeli human rights lawyer, not long ago. And I mean, he's someone who does make lots and lots of work for Palestinian rights. But he had this article about, what was I doing when Israel was bombing, I can't remember where now, but when Israel was bombing Gaza the other night, it was a particularly bad bombing, and he said, me and my son, we were just like watching a film, and then the night before, there was some more bombing, we were having a takeout or something, and he was saying, how is it possible that we haven't done even more than what some of us are doing? We should be just doing absolutely everything we can, and it's not actually happening because I had a takeout yesterday, you know. That's really the attitude that that you need to have, and it's still not happening.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, like we literally like 2 to 3 times a week, we were shutting down bridges, shutting down federal buildings, shutting down state buildings, shutting down corporations, passing ceasefire resolutions, getting arrested, like dropping banners, dropping leaflets, stopping trains, like all over the United States, and we were just like surely, I mean, no matter, even though the Dahin doctrine that Hayo spoke about has been true, we knew there would be retaliation. You know, we were all like bracing for the retaliation. But I don't think any of us really understood that it was going to go on so long and be so complete and so uncontested, and that our government would not only not stop it, but give more to Israel. Get in further behind Israel. And so, I remember growing up and thinking like, how did my ancestors get completely wiped out? Like, what were people doing during the Nazi genocide? Like, how could that happen? And in this moment, I understand. I take my child to school every day, right? We went to a cafe before we came here, and he had French fries and I had, and it's like, and it's not because we don't care, but it is because we haven't built the power together. And so we're pausing a little bit to think about how do we build more power together over more places so that we can stop doing it. To me, the consciousness is, as he said, always being aware that our duty is to keep doing more, to keep doing it. And I think it's going to get harder. It's going to get worse. We have like a horrible government that now has the president, the Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court. And the green lights he's going to give all over the world is going to have a lot of consequences. And it's still like you still have to do the right thing because that's the only course for humanity, right? To preserve humanity is what I mean. So I totally relate to that and struggle with it a lot, as I'm sure everyone in this room does. Like, how do you keep going and doing your day-to-day? But also, like, I live in the United States. Like, people are brutally, like, living in brutal conditions all the time. And we fight those conditions, and, you know, it's just, it's a more existential question, right?
It helps to know it's the same battle.
Yeah, that's it. That's right. And that we're together in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
But building,
Feels like a good note to end on, actually. Yeah.
yeah.
No, but somebody might be doing something totally different in the US relating to
Yeah.
problems faced by US people who are not being bombed, but
That's right.
it's all part of the same
That's right.
struggle.
That's right.
The
Yeah.
answer is organize, organize, organize. And that's why we're here too. So, we should be leaving this room soon. So, last question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the talk. It's really interesting. Just a question similar to this one, connected. You know, how do you compare
compare it to the 60s, to the movement again, against the war in Vietnam and the, in that, why is it not getting momentum? Why is it not growing more? Is it because it is such a sensitive field issue, or because people are more on the populist side, even though we see everything online? So why is not everything stopping like in the 60s, or because the Americans themselves are not dying, on the ground?
Well, that is what made a pretty big difference. That was a big turning point around the protests in the United States. But I think it is growing.
Yeah.
There's never been more masses with Palestine than there are right now. We're the majority. We are the world's majority. And there is a growing number of people in the United States, and the majority of people challenge it. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the question for us is, but it's also not stopping it. And so I think this thing about that our fights are the same fights and how we actually connect them more practically feels really important. I mean, I don't have any more answers than the rest of you, but I think it's also a different moment than the late 19th. There's just a different alignment of forces, right, in the world. And like a lot of our focus right now is on supporting each other in surviving. And I think that's probably going to become increasingly true. And that's a slightly different fight than what was happening then, but the principle of the number of people it takes to get our governments to shift remain the same. And what are those turning points for us, right? And it may not stop it in the short term, but it's how we build for how we move forward. And that's what we're trying to focus on right now, is how we build moving forward. But it's also like, how do we send as much aid immediately as possible and get it in? I mean, both are true, right? So, but yeah, it's a hard question.
It would just seem that now with the Gaza being so urgent, it would just seem that it would just
everybody.
Stop. Yeah, so it's not, like unfortunate that it's not happening.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, can we end there? And I just want to inform you, or do you want to inform about Saturday?
I can inform you. Okay. So, since we're talking about organizing, we would like to invite all of you who are not aware yet. There's going to be another big protest on Saturday. We're starting at 1 p.m. on Jan Palach Square. We would like to invite all of you to join us because, as it was mentioned, it is really important to keep organizing, to keep sort of our presence, to keep the pressure, not just on our government, but also on our media. And we have said many times, when the media refuses to do their job, we sort of have to do their job for them. So being in the streets and raising awareness of what is happening is really important. And it's been over a year. We're all tired, but we all still have our voices and we all still have our bodies. We do expect that there's going to be maybe fewer people because it's getting cold. Yeah. So while that might deter some people, I think the more of you can convince maybe 2 or 3 friends to come with you, the better. And that being said, I also have some posters here that I put sticky things on the back of them. And if all of you could take, 3, 4 posters and just stick them somewhere on your way home, so when Prague wakes up tomorrow, the city is going to be filled with posters. That would be really nice, and we would really appreciate your help. So once again, Saturday, 1 p.m., Jan Palach Square, or the information is where you normally find it, Prague for Palestine Youth, Združení Přátelé Palestiny, etc. So, I'm going to keep them here.
And Sara is going to speak there.
Yes, Sarah's going to speak there. We're going to be talking about human rights because it's the weekend ahead of the International Day of Human Rights. So there's going to be, a lot of philosophical questions asking ourselves, is Zionism compatible with human rights, and what's the role of international institutions in sort of protecting the people that need protection, especially in the global south. So yeah, I'll keep them here, and
Thank
if you
you.
take some and help us fill the city, we would be very grateful. And yeah, I put the sticky things there for you, so you don't have to do any work. Just go and stick
Thank
them
you.
in some nice places. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Few more announcements. I don't know if everybody catch today. Amnesty International has a final issued report about the genocide in Gaza, and on 9th, I believe they have this evening with the International Day of Human Rights. It's on 10th, but they have this party evening on the 9th. So anybody who's interested, I urge you to come there and don't stop talking about Palestine, because we know even for Amnesty International it's difficult. And I think if they, see and hear more people who care, it could bring them more forward. And now they have the report. So please just take the report. It's on their website in Czech, and just spread it everywhere, especially on the social media of our government representatives. And Saturday we said there are more events, but if you want to join us, we're gonna. You still have time, right?
For what?
Now for after.
Yeah.
Right. If you wanna, because we really need to get out of this room. So if you wanna stick around, just come with us, and hopefully see you on Saturday, 1 o'clock. Palachovo, very close to here. And of course, follow Sadale Palestini, Prague for Palestine Youth, ISM on website, and International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network.
Thank you.
Okay.